Welcome to the Line of Flight. This episode is inspired by Gilles Deleuze's book Difference and Repetition. As some of you may realize, every episode so far has been based on the ideas of Deleuze and Guattari's 1000 Plateaus. I wanted to expand out a bit to the intersection between writing and other philosophical works, but, true to form for this episode, the moving on is a return and the return is a way of leaping to another area in which action and learning may occur. Or, may not. So let's begin our line of flight, starting at our body without organs. That background of chaos which organ machines attempt to latch onto, which resists organization. Our zero line, our plane of consistency. The thesis in which to ground this whole rhizome is creativity. Creativity is a chaotic mess. A string of words and images that mean nothing on their own. Obsidian, nebula, fracture, lantern, cascade, ember, twilight, tempest, alloy, reverie, echo, aurora, spire, labyrinth, plume, nexus, shimmer, vortex, glyph, solstice. But rules and repetition of rules can create meaning, because it can create structure. Obsidian, obsidian, nebula, fracture, 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 lantern, cascade, 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 ember, twilight, 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 tempest, alloy, 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 reverie, echo, 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 aurora, spire, 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 labyrinth, plume, plume, nexus, shimmer, 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 vortex, glyph, 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 solstice. The application of rules to an otherwise meaningless string makes it feel intentional and therefore worth engaging with. The space between the application of the rules remain in their chaotic state. The noise they represent in the spaces between make this more than a string of words repeating themselves once more per word. Here we see structure as a fundamental building block of art. Another example of this is the Islamic practice of Qur'an recitation and the rules of tajweed. Tajweed describes the hyper-specific ways in which each word of the Qur'an is to be pronounced during a recitation. Deviation is unacceptable, not despite, but rather because of this rigid system of pronunciation in recitation. The practice is anything but dull reproduction of the same words. It is a rather artistic, and beautiful, repetition. Listen to 10 people recite the Quran and you will hear it done in 10 ways, though all may fall within the bounds of tajweed. When starting out in recitation, it sounds much the same. It is an attempt at reproduction of what the Prophet recited in his own time. But once mastered, because of how often it is done, its tones and rhythms take on new life as an expression of the reciter. Sometimes dull and dry and weary, other times vibrant and tear-soaked and almost singing. Sometimes singing outright, to the extent that the rules permit. The craft of the reproductive effort gives way to an art of repetition, which is not reproduction by its nature. Without the structure given by tajweed, it would merely be dry reading. Much like reading the Bible with a Bible study group. Without rules to look to, one doesn't know how to bend around the rules to express themselves. The repression gives the criterion for better expression. For writers, story structure is like this. Many writers say they don't need structure, but when they write in an unstructured way it comes out unreadable and never in an interesting way. Because in the absence of rules to work around, we just slop together whatever comes to mind, and it's usually going to be highly derivative of whatever media we've consumed lately, sometimes to the point of simple plagiarism that no one will find because they won't read past the first page. This is something I've recently noticed in my oldest books, which I've long since taken off the market. I ripped of Thus Spake Zarathustra a lot, tearing quotes directly from it, in fact. I also ripped off other things I'd read while feeling all the while that I was being original and artistic because my creativity was flowing freely with no structure or even ideas of structures. Really, it was all a hot mess and poorly written with half-understood quotes from other writers strewn about. Looking back at these first attempts, the unoriginal stories are a big pet peeve. Sometimes I just rewrote the same story. Often it involves someone moving along something easily defined towards an easy goal and running into obstacles. A tribesman following a river to a monster was a common motif, which I stole from Inuit myths of the culture hero Gluskap. Very go here, kill this, save that. Once I became aware of structure, my stories didn't just end up being told better. They ended up being more mine. Having to figure out how the story I wanted to tell would fit a 3-act structure forced me to get into specifics and rework things. My first passable book, by my standards, was divided into 3 acts and subdivided so that each act had 3 acts. At the time I had no idea what a beat was. The later introduction of concrete beats or act goals, i.e. in this act X, Y, and Z must happen at some point in that order, allowed further creativity and got me used to forging stories rather than slopping them onto a page, so that eventually I could do it instinctively and hit my beats. And in the space between those beats, my style was formed and brought to the surface. A strong undercurrent of dark humor became a norm between the beats. A lower current of sexism, regrettably, formed and was eventually snuffed out and replaced with overcorrections that I still sometimes engage in. You'll notice that I almost never have male protagonists anymore. A strong Marxist sentiment permeates my work. For a time, it was Maoist adjacent, but now more anarchist Marxist or democratic socialist. My desire for immersion in a story led to me starting out with the five senses. And my desire for narrative distance on sensitive topics lead me to work in third person when I write about them. Rules brought my creativity into striated lines that it had to transform within in interesting ways, rather than leaving it in between to produce only a collage of nonsense that dreams of being a story. Chaos and order. Apollo and Dionysus. ID and superego. Structure and creativity. These things are not opposites, but prerequisites for allowing their dialectical antitheses to be revealed and put to use. Without creativity, structure is just dead. Without structure, creativity is just an amorphous blob of life. Together, they gel into you as you become your art and your art becomes you. That's all for now. If you enjoyed this line of flight, tune in next time when we tackle more on writing and where applicable its intersection with philosophy.